All right, hello again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the textbook Web Development and Design Foundations with HTML 7th edition by Terry Falk Morris. We're up to Chapter 3 right now, which in your book starts on page 81, and the chapter is entitled Configuring Color and Text with CSS. In this chapter, we will learn, among other things, describe the evolution of style sheets, so what's happened over the years, list advantages of using cascading style sheets, more often or more commonly referred to as CSS, use color on web pages, create style sheets that configure common color and text properties, apply inline styles, apply embedded styles, use external style sheets, configure element class, ID, and contextual selectors, utilize the cascade in CSS, and validate CSS. Now, what you're going to find in here is what we end up talking about after a while is, for lack of better words, we'll call it a separation of concerns. So if you imagine that a website has got three major components in it, it's got all of the tags, your bold tags, and all of the other stuff like that. Your paragraph tags, your H1 headers, all of that good stuff. So if that's one thing, so let's call that the content. All right? And if we look up here, for example, under the Zen Garden, you'll notice we've got a little blue background here. This is in red. This looks like it's in gray. So that's, for lack of better words, that's the appearance. And then what we'll also be putting in much later on in the semester is we'll talk about logic that's on a page to make it do something. So if you could imagine taking your website and breaking it into those three parts, pieces, whatever you want to call it, then we've talked a little bit in the previous two chapters about the first part, which is the content. That's our HTML, our hypertext markup language. In this chapter, we're going to talk about presentation, which is CSS. And in a much later chapter, toward the end of the book, we'll talk about JavaScript, which is more the logical part. All right, if you do go out to this site, I'm not going to do it right now, but if you go out to zengarden.com, that site's been around for a long time, and it shows you some of the things that are available that you can do using CSS. All right, style sheets have been around for a long time, even before the web, but CSS, as it says, it provides the functionality of style sheets, and it's flexible, it's cross-platform, which means that if I say I want something to be red in color, it should be red regardless of whether I'm using Firefox or Chrome or IE or whatever. It's a standards-based language. It was, again, basically developed by the World Wide Web Consortium. So why do you want to use it? Again, I don't want to read this to you, but I do want to especially, again, hammer on the second point that's shown right there. Style is separate from structure. That's what we talked about earlier. All right? What you'll see over time, eventually what we'll have is we'll have our HTML in one file, our CSS in another file, and our JavaScript in another file. And that's the third bullet that they talk about right here. Plus, if you've got a document, and if that document has all of your CSS in it, and you decide you want to make major changes, let's say you're using just one file for CSS throughout a website. Normally it's more complex than that, but let's just keep it simple here. And I decide I want to change my entire color scheme from one color to another. Well, there's only one place I have to go to check to make changes. All right, so it's going to be easier to maintain. So if we talk about this, we've got inline styles, we've got embedded styles, we've got external styles, and we've got imported styles. All right. Well, if we look at these, we'll notice Inline styles are literally in the document themselves. So there's something you put in the body section. I'm going to give you examples of all these in just a bit. But inline styles, by and large, are going to be in the body itself, and maybe it's a word or a sentence or a paragraph that you want to change a font size or a color or something else. Okay? Embedded styles. Those are put in the head section between what are called style tags. You're going to see those in just a minute. If you take those style tags and you basically pull them out, all the stuff in between the style tags, and put them in their own document, those are external styles. You can also have imported styles, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end. All right. Before I get into the syntax, let's look at an example of each one of these. All right. Now, I will not lie to you. Here is the document that we were using, the one I created last time, our Chapter 3 index. We don't need our Chapter 2 one anymore. All right. But what I want to do here is I want to go look, and I'm going to type in here CSS. How about this? Inline CSS. CSS how to, I don't know if that's what I want, but we'll find out. Relic style sheet. No, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that. This is what I want to do. All right. So what do I mean? Well, I'm going to actually try to show you what I mean. Okay. So I'm going to come in here, and in my body section, and I guess I don't have my ending body tag, so I need that. I can put the comment in there with it, so that'll be end of body section. All right, so I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to put in a paragraph, and it's going to say, once upon a time, there was a king and a queen. The end. Now, I know this looks stupid, but just please bear with me for a second, okay? All right, if I save that, and I go and I run this, and I want to change that to Chapter 3. Okay, there's our index file. Once upon a time, there was a king and a queen, the end. Okay, nothing big there. All right, but we are going to start making something kind of big out of it right now. Or what's that? That was copy. I don't like that example, what they're giving here. I want to use one with a span tag in it. So, inline CSS using a span tag. All right, span tag. Here we go. All right. In fact, let's use their example, and then we'll come back and we'll fix my example. All right, so I'm going to keep that in there just the way it is, and I'm going to add another paragraph here. My mother has, okay, and it may not look like much, but let's run it, and then we'll come back and we'll decompose it a little bit. My mother has blue eyes, and notice that the word blue isn't blue. So what did we do right there? All right. What we did was we said, okay, before this word, I'm putting this word in what are called span tags. Now, we talked about a div in the last chapter, and a div is a division, but it's a division that can include a bunch of stuff, a bunch of what are called block style elements. Those elements that have blank lines before them and blank lines after them. But if I don't want a div, I want something that reacts but doesn't give me blank lines, I can use a span. So what I'm saying in here is what I want to do is I want you to type in my mother has like we would normally. But before the word blue, we want you to say the font style that we're going to use is going to have a color of blue in it. And you can see that it does. Now I'm going to grab this right there. Okay, you have to bear with me for a second because this is going to look a little funky. Where it says once upon a time, I only want that O. That's all I want. But where it says style equal, I want to change this to font size equal, I'm going to put 3M in there, okay? and then I'm going to end my span tag. Now, I may have done this wrong, so if nothing works, don't worry about it. But if it works the way I'm hoping it will work, all right? And I don't know if do I just say size? I don't remember. Maybe that'll work. If it turns out that the O in once is real big, I've done what I wanted to show you. And it didn't work for blazes. How to use a span tag with CSS to make a paragraph, let's just say larger. I don't want to make a paragraph, I just want to make a word larger. Span tag, how do you bold words within a paragraph? To make paragraph text larger. It's the font size attribute. That's what I want. It is font size. Well, let's go back to this and change that to font dash size and see if that does anything. Again, I'm real close here, but I'm not giving you the right stuff. That didn't do anything. What I'm showing you right now, whether you realize it or not, is in my own way. I'm human, because I can't remember how to do this, and I should have checked before the chapter started. P style equal font size 20 pixels. So, let's try that. All right, so I've changed this to span style equal font size of 20 pixels. Now that should make the O much bigger. Ideally, at least, this is going to make that O much bigger than it was previously. That O right there. It's hard to tell there, but it is bigger. All right, you might say, no, it's not. Well, then let's make it even bigger so you can see the difference. All right, and I'm going to make it absurdly large. All right, I'm going to make it 120 pixels, and I'm going to make sure that I have no blank spaces in there. Watch how different it's going to look right now, please. There's that O, now watch. Okay, did you ever see a story like that where it says once upon a time where the O is really big? Well, that's, to me, is the kind of reason, or that is why you would use inline CSS like this. So I'm going to put a comment here. And I'm going to say, make the O in once bigger with CSS. And that's exactly what it did. All right. That will say here, make the word blue the color blue with CSS. Okay, so that's what we did. All right. So there's our first example. Again, doesn't look like all that much, but you can see what it's done. So that's the first example. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this whole file that we just created, all right, and I'm going to do a file, save as, and instead of calling it index.html, I'm going to call it index2.html. And I'm gonna call this our second plus web page. And I'm gonna take these lines and I'm gonna get them out of there. I'm gonna still make them with CSS, but I'm gonna put them up here in our head tag. All right, so I'm gonna put in here what's called a style tag. All right, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to say $, I'm going to call it big font, which is a stupid name, but I'm going to use it anyway. Font size 120 pixels. All right, so I'm hoping that that's correct the way that I've set that up. So font size will be 120 pixels. Now what I have to change here is I have to come in and I have to say I want this O right there, just that O. And I'm not even sure if I can do that like this. Let's see if I take and say right here, I'm going to say here ID equals big font, like we just set up. All right. I want to see what's going to change after we do this. If what happens, what I think is going to happen happens, this whole thing will now be 120 pixels. And if nothing happens, then I, of course, screwed up the CSS. So there's index 2, and you'll notice now the whole thing is that size. Okay? So what did I just do? I mean, well, I came up here and I said, okay, I'm going to set up my own CSS style in here that I'm calling big font. All right, anything that has that big font associated with it, give it a font size of 120 pixels. What does that mean? That means that it's, if I start something with a pound sign, it means this is an ID, which means this can only appear one time on a page. All right. So where I said here ID equal big font, it said, okay, look for something with an ID of big font, and whatever is between those curly braces, apply it. Like what? What if I decided I wanted to make this green? So I could say here color green. Now notice what happens when I refresh this. Okay, it's pretty obvious. You see virtually instantaneous effects in there. All right. So, you know, and you might say, well, why aren't you showing us? Well, what I showed you with the first example in here, with that first example, let's bring that one back up. With this first example where we use these span tags, that's designed for individual pieces that are inside of something. Okay? What if I wanted to come in here and I wanted to go and grab and put both of these things together? In fact, well, let's do the blue thing first. Okay? Where you got my mother has blue eyes. Well, I could come in here if I wanted to. I could create another thing that's in here. But what if I wanted, I can only use these things that start with a pound sign once per page. What if I wanted to use blue all over the place? Then rather than creating an ID, I can create a class which starts with a period. And we'll just call this color blue, which again is not a great name. And I'm going to say here color blue. All right. Now when I come over to this paragraph, all right, and I'm going to make this whole paragraph blue. So I'm going to say here, make the paragraph bigger with CSS. And this is going to say make the paragraph the color blue with CSS. All right, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say here class equals color blue. Now I can get rid of that span, and we'll see right away, we'll be able to tell literally immediately whether or not it worked. All right. Well, it's hard to see down here. My mother has blue eyes is all in blue. So let's say you don't believe me. Okay? Well, I can't see that, Jeff. I don't believe you. Well, the reason that you don't use a name like color blue, it's fine when that's all that's in here. But what if later I come in here and I want to say font size 60 pixels? All right. Now I've got something that's called color blue, which doesn't only change the color, but it changes the font size. That's considered a bad practice, but see now how it's in blue? All right. So what I'm very, very quickly showing you here are different ways that we can use this stuff called CSS. All right. Now I'm going to take the file that I was just working on, this index2, and I'm going to do a file, save as, and I'm going to save it again, but I'm going to save it as index3. All right. And we'll call this our second plus web page. Now I'm going to grab everything that was put in here, all this stuff, and I'm going to cut it out, and I'm going to create a brand new file, and I'm going to paste it in. All right. Now, it's in a file by itself, so I have to save it with a name of CSS. So I'm going to call this styles.css, which is a name that's oftentimes used. Is something along those lines. So styles.css. There it is. You can see how the colors in there changed. But now, well, these style tags that are still in here don't mean anything. The system doesn't do anything with them. But notice if I save this, go back, and try to bring up index 3, doesn't work. Because I have not yet linked my web page to that CSS file. So I've got to come in here and use what's called a link tag and let it know that the relationship is it's a style sheet and the hypertext reference is styles.css. All right, if I want to, I can also put the MIME type in there, so I can say type, I think it's type equals text/CSS. I don't really remember. It's not used anymore because you don't have to. But now that I put this link line in here, that line, let's go back to the file that didn't work and let's refresh it. And there it is. My blue is back and my green is back. So what I have shown you in these 3 examples, we haven't even started in the chapter yet, but I showed you how you can use CSS inline via the use of span tags. That was what we looked at first. Then, secondly, I showed you how you can use CSS internally. Sometimes, it's got different names. But this would only apply to this page because that's where the style tags are. All right? Then, finally, I showed you how you can link in an external CSS file. Remember, this CSS file right there is exactly the same as this CSS file in here without the style tags, but within its own file with a .css extension that I link to in here. So that was very quick, but I wanted you to see that as we're starting in here so you can see kind of what's going on. Now CSS works, the CSS syntax, which they're starting to discuss right here, as it says, they're composed of rules that describe the styling to be applied. I already showed you some of those. So we didn't use body, all right, but we used in here, for example, I had a class, but I could do it that way too. What if I wanted the entire thing that was in here, everything? What if I said I wanted the entire, let's go to here, because I want to show you something. Again, this is very important that you see this stuff. What if I said in here, well, I want the body, so I want everything that's in the body. All right, and I want it all, everything that's in here. I want it to be red. All right, I want all of the font color to be red. Here I said green, here I said blue. Well, there's my 3, and I refresh, and nothing turned red. Why didn't anything turn red? Well, if you think to yourself, Well, maybe it didn't because you kind of overrode it with this stuff. Then you're starting to get what's going on here. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add 3 new paragraphs. New paragraph 1. We'll put 2 more of these in. New paragraph 2 and new paragraph 3. All right, now let's take a look. See what color they are? They're all red. Because what this says in our CSS, by us coming in here and putting here body, means anything that I haven't overridden later, make it red. So I'll come in here and just so you see it, so you're sure you can see all of it. Well, again, we'll say font, size, we'll just make it 50 pixels. Okay? And again, when you see this, now it's much more evident to you that it's red. All right? So again, the whole idea behind CSS is what it allows you to do is it allows you, by using selectors, declaration properties, and values. So we selector, declaration property, declaration value. Selector, declaration property, declaration value. Declaration property, declaration value. Selector, declaration property, declaration value. Declaration property, declaration value. Selector, declaration property, declaration value. Declaration property, declaration value. I want to just try to keep hammering and hammering and hammering and hammering and hammering this stuff at you. Because the only way that it'll make sense is if you actually start using it on your own. All right, and it's not that any of this stuff is exceedingly difficult, but it takes practice. All right, so here's another example. So what is it saying? You should be able to look at that and figure out exactly what's happening in there. It's saying that you want by default, unless you overwrite it later, you want all of the text to be blue. What if I decided I wanted the background? All right, what if I wanted the background to be, let's say, purple? I don't know why, but I'll do that anyway. So I could come in here under the body and I can say either background, color, purple. All right, and notice what happens when I do this. There it is. Now my other colors might look a little funky now, but it's because the background is purple. So I can either do that, or I can just use the word background because it defaults to background color. So either one of those will work. So when I refresh this, when I refresh this, it looks exactly the same. All right? What you can do with CSS on a web page is, I don't mean to sound hokey here, but it's limited by your imagination and not much else. Now, when we do this, I want you to see this. So let's say here I've got color red. Red is a built-in color, and there's probably 100 to 200 built-in colors. But what if I didn't know there was a color red? How else could I do this? And I'm going to show you 2 ways I can do the exact same thing here with a body, this color red. In fact, let's see. We'll use the background here. We'll use the purple. So let's say I didn't think purple was a color that I could actually use. How could I figure it out? I can say this, pound. All right, and that pound doesn't mean an ID like this. That pound means that what I'm about to do is enter a number. And if I put in here the amount of red that I want, the amount of green that I want, the amount of blue that I want, all right? Notice what happens when I refresh. All right? That's also a purple. I guess it's a little different than the other built-in purple color. All right, but it's purple. So what I'm showing you is another way. This is using hex notation. Hex is base 16. And if you've never heard that before, we're used to counting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, etc., because we're used to base 10, which is decimal. With hexadecimal, you go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, then 1, 0. So it's another number system. This says, I want you to give me all the red you've got, none of the green, and all of the blue that you've got. So when you use this, the first two numbers that you put in here are the amount of red, the second two are the amount of green, and the last two are the amount of blue. You need the pound sign before it. Notice if I leave the pound sign off, how does this change? I get all my, it all goes away. The background color all leaves. Well, what if I either didn't want to do it that way or didn't like doing it that way? Another way that I can do that is I can use a function that's called RGB, which means the same thing, the amount of red, the amount of green, and the amount of blue. So I can say RGB, and there I can say 255, which means all the red you can give me, 0 because I don't want any green, and 255, which means all the blue that you can give me. And notice again, if I come in here and I refresh, there's my purple again. Okay? So what I've shown you here are different ways that you can come in here and work with color. So I want to bring back all three of these. You wouldn't use all three, of course, but I want to show you. There's one way of doing it. There's one way of doing it. The F's can be capitalized or lowercase. It doesn't matter. Or I can just use the word purple. They will all do the same thing. Now, I don't want to use these two. I just want to use the last one. So when I want to comment stuff out in CSS, I do it a little differently. I put a /, then an asterisk, and when I'm all done, when I'm finished, I put an asterisk and another /. All right? So again, when I come back here and I refresh, there's my other color purple. All right? Now I'm going through this quickly. We'll go through it in class in much more depth and breadth of color coverage rather, but I wanted you to see what they're showing here. All right, table 3.1 that's in your book, and table 3.1 takes up almost all of page 85. Okay, and they show some of the CSS properties that are introduced in the chapter. Okay, so I'm not going to put all of them in here right now. I've already shown you background color, and I've shown you color. Let's look at, and I've shown you font size. Let's look at font family. We'll look at a few of these. So let's do this. Again, I will grab everything that's in here, copy it to the clipboard, and let's see. I will come back into here, and I'm going to just paste this into the bottom. Right now it won't make much sense, but these are what I want to use. So we've got background color, which is the same as color, so we've used that one already. So that one I can get out of here. We've got color, and we've used that one already, so I can get that out of there. The next one is font family, which says literally what font do you want to use. Well, for big font here, let's do this. We're going to put in here font family, okay, and we're going to put this in here. We're going to say Times New Roman, and I need those double quotes in there because there's blank spaces in the word, Arial, Helvetica, sans serif. In English, what this says is, all right, anytime I'm using big font, attempt, if you've got Times New Roman, if you've got that font, use that on whatever I set up for big font. If you can't find that, then try to use Arial. If you can't find that, then use Helvetica. And if you can't find that, virtually every machine has got serif and sans serif stuff on there. You might say, well, I don't understand. How does it look different? Let's look. I just saved. All right. That big font is right here. Let's take a look when I refresh and see. I know it's tough to tell with the coloring here, but see if the font style changes. And it might have already been Times New Roman. So let's change it. Instead of having Times New Roman first, let's have Arial first. All right, so we'll do that. All right, so we've got Arial first. So now let's see when we refresh if this looks different. Okay, hopefully you could tell there was a big difference in the way the font looked. So again, I'm just running through this. I can't say this to you too many times. The best way to learn this stuff is to start, make yourself a style sheet, make yourself a simple little HTML document, and start to play. All right, font size I've already hit on. How about font style? Well, we could have come in here and we could have said this, font style, style. And for font style, we could put, for example, we could put in here italic. Okay, so let's go back and let's take a look at our paragraph that's in blue and see if it looks any different. Hopefully you can tell now it's been italicized. All right. Font weight. Well, typically you use font weight. All right. You use that if you want to bold something. So font weight, bold. So now let's look and see if this paragraph also is bolded when we get done. And you can see that it is. All right, again, it's not my intention to make you an expert on this, but just to start going over the stuff that's in here. All right, line height. It's the spacing allowed for a line of text. Okay, well, let's say we're going to go over, we're going to grab that line height. Oops, well, it's okay. And in our paragraph here that said big font, we're going to say line height 200%. All right? And what I'm going to do, because otherwise it won't make, well, I don't think it's going to make much difference right now, but let's look at it anyway. So there it is. Let's refresh. Oh, we got double spacing. See that? That was the line height. So this line is actually taking up that much room all the way to here. All right. So let's see, what else do we have here? Margin. It's kind of a neat one. And we're going to go over this in much more depth and breadth of coverage later. So please, if it doesn't totally make sense, don't let it bother you. I'm going to say here, margin left 30 pixels. And again, you might say, well, what did that do? It's easier to show you. See how this is pushed pretty much right against there? Notice what happens when I refresh. See how it's moved over now? I gave it 30 pixels. All right, I gave it 30 pixels of left margin. Again, we're going to have an entire chapter where we talk about margin and the CSS box model very shortly. All right, what's left? Text align. Let's go to that thing we put there, color blue, and we'll say this. We'll say text align center. Again, the easiest way to see this stuff, and that's right here. The easiest way to see it is to see it before your very eyes, how that's centered it on the page. All right, couple more. Text decoration. All right, I'm going to add that to my big font paragraph here. And I'm going to say text decoration, none. You say, well, what does that do? I have to go back into here now. And in that paragraph that I used for big font, here is a hyperlink to, and we'll put in here a href equals, let's put this on the next line, http://www.rankin.edu Rankin Tech College. All right. Why did I do that? You'll have to look. Okay. Here's to Rank Tech College. So why? I thought that had text decoration none set on that one. So I'll have to double check. Three, and that's got styles. Body big font. Isn't big font? Well, we had this. Yeah, it's big font. Text decoration none. Wow, that's supposed to remove the underline, and it didn't. Text decoration none. Both saved too. Yeah, I want that that underline to go away. And I know that indeed text decoration none is what we do in order to do that. It should have caused the hyperlink not to be underlined if in a browser that normally processes it in that manner. That's what it says in the book, and I know that that's done correctly. So let's go back and check it one last time. ID equal big font. Number 3, so I'm doing it on the right one. Styles.css. Big font. That should not be underlined, and it is. I'm trying for the life of me to figure out why that would be. Huh. That's not going to change anything. Well, again, what I was looking for was for this to not have the underline, which is still there. So I'm going to have to check on that, and I promise you that I will. So if I can see if I can figure out what the problem with that was, because I'm not sure, just taking a look at it right now, exactly what the problem was. But what I've attempted to do here is to show you at least most of the things correctly, all right, that are on this particular slide. Maybe I didn't show you all of them, but I showed you most of them, and virtually everyone I showed you worked. All right. Color on web pages, I kind of went through that earlier with you. I will tell you that if you go to Appendix 8H in your book, which is on page 649, there is a web-safe color palette there that shows a lot more than what you see here. Okay? And I showed you how to use the RGB, and I showed you how to use the hex, and I showed you how to use some of the actual words that are built in. Okay? Again, you need to use the pound sign to indicate a hex value. Hex pairs go from 00 to FF, and the 3 together are the amount of red, the amount of green, and the amount of blue. So what you see on page 649 is this web color palette. These are the 216 colors that are built into browsers. They display pretty much the same on a Mac or a non-Mac platform. And she's got a chart here also if you need even more than that. And the reason that that's important, they start to come in here now and talk about making color choices. But the reason that all of that kind of stuff is actually important is what you have to start thinking about is, okay, I want to learn how to do this. And let's say my dad or my mom or my brother is starting up their own company, and I told them I'd make a website for them. Well, you have to start thinking when they talk about color choices then, what colors go together and what colors don't go together. You want to make sure that when you're doing this kind of thing, you really and truly do want to make sure that when you're doing this, you pick colors that are compatible with one another. And there's all sorts of sites that you can go to get more information on this stuff. But a couple things to remember. First, you want to make sure there's a contrast between your background color and your text color. Approximately somewhere between 5 and 10% of all people in the world are colorblind. And if you don't have a big enough difference between the two, that's why most of the time, if you've got a very generic, vanilla-looking website, a lot of times what people will do will be they'll have a white background and they'll have black text because you can't have any more contrast than that. All right? So when you want to choose a color scheme, the author gives you some examples here. You can go out to meyerweb.com, and that's a site that's basically housed by a gentleman named Eric Meyer, who's one of the founders of CSS. You can choose, basically you can base your site off the color of a photograph or some other image, and there's the thing. You can begin with your own favorite color. Things to be leery of. If you've never heard this before, as an example, you probably, depending on the type of site you're writing, you probably don't want to have a background color that's a bright red. It's the hardest color on the central nervous system. All right. Also, you probably want things that are much more colorful for younger people and maybe not as much color for people as they get older. All right. These are just studies and things that people have done to check on things like that. When you choose colors for text and background, contrast is needed. We already mentioned that. If you want to verify contrast, here's some sites that you can go to for more. All right. So I showed you the inline CSS. And we did that, remember, with the once upon a time and with the blue thing that was in there. I showed you the style with the style attributes. Okay. And I also showed it to you. So that was the internal style. But I showed you also how you could do it with an external file. We've now gone over, we went over font weight, we went over font style, we went over font size, we went over font family. And just so you know, I want to mention this to you. This isn't in your book yet. It may be discussed later. It may not be discussed later. I don't know. But if I go out and I put in here Google fonts, I can go out to google.com/fonts. And if I want, there are literally, I don't know, I think there are more than 100 different, might even be 500 different fonts in here. And what I can do is I can download those fonts and then make them available to anyone who goes to my website. So if you're not happy with the standard font types, you do have alternatives. All right. Font size, you can set font size in different ways. You can set values as shown right there, XX small all the way to XX large. You can do what are called M's. So if you want to use something that's the regular size, you would just say 1M because that pretty much is regular size. All right. But if you want something that's double that, you could use 2M. Notice the difference in size between the two of these. All right. You can use pixels. You can use points. And you can use percentages. What you'll find as we go on in here is the two you'll probably, out of these 5 choices here, the two you will probably use the most often, probably, are M units and percentages. Because what those two things do is they scale. So as you look at your website on a desktop, for example, as opposed to on a tablet, as opposed to on a cell phone, okay, where the size of the font is going to be different, M units and percentages scale much better. And we'll get into that in later chapters. All right, we've looked a little bit at the font family. And you'll notice there are serif and there are sans serif fonts. As it says, not everyone has the same fonts installed on their computer. That's why you typically give it font family and you give it a name. And typically the last one in your list is either serif or sans serif. All right. Also, as I mentioned to you before, if you use a name like Times New Roman or Lucida Console, that's 2 words, or Comic Sans MS, which is 3 words, or Times New Roman, which is 3 words, you need to put those values inside of double quotes. Right? So, it's kind of neat right here is if you take a look at this, what they've done is they've taken what probably would be a very generic looking stuff right here and they've prettied it up. Well, let's look at what they've done. They changed the background color to whatever that is, and it's kind of hard to tell looking at it right here, kind of a grayish maybe. The text color is now blue. The font family that's being used is said use Arial if you have it. If you can't find Arial, use Verdana. If you can't find that, use sans serif. For the H1, take the H1 and make the background color the same color as our text. So that blue right there is the same color as the text, but make the color more of a white. Make the line height 200%, so make it double its regular size, and you can see the font family. For H2, like this, again, you'll notice the background color is again changed. All right, the text color is the same as the color down here, and the font family. Paragraphs, you're saying we want our paragraphs to be 90% of their regular size. And you'll notice this is smaller than this is. And you want all of your unordered lists to be bolded. Ideally, you can start reading through this stuff and it'll start making some sense to you. Here are some other properties. Again, how do you find out how to use these? Well, one thing I wanted to mention to you, and I didn't yet, but we talked before, and if you go out again to w3schools.com and you go out to their tutorials, you'll notice that there's CSS. And there is a CSS tutorial that you can go through also. It starts very basic. There are literally hundreds of examples in it. And the W3 schools say all those examples are totally there for you to use. Add to your website or whatever. All right. You can, as it says here, you can configure CSS style rules. We've talked a little bit now. I showed you the HTML element selector. So I showed you how to set up something for a paragraph, for example. We did the class. Remember, I did the class of blue text or whatever it was called. The ID I did of big font. And we'll look at a little bit at Descendant right now. All right. Remember, classes must start with a period. You can apply classes as many times on a page as you wish. What this is just called new, which is kind of a silly name, but it says the color will be total red, no green, no blue. So it means that the text color will be red and it will be italicized. So if you apply it, that's what it'll look like. But you have to say class equal with the name. With the ID, again, with this particular example, again, you'll see that it's red, the font size is double, and it's italicized. But you have to say ID equals because it starts with the pound sign. What this says right here is if I have an ID and the ID is named content, any paragraphs inside of that ID should have a color that's green. So using this stuff in many ways, what you're doing in here is you are working with something that I would say it's not so much a science. In many ways, it almost is more of an art. All right? And you get better at it by playing with it and playing with it and playing with it and playing with it and playing with it. I mean, in your book on the more font properties on pages 94 and 95, they give you very simple little examples. All right? And they talk even about some of the newer CSS3 text shadowing stuff on pages 96 and 97. So you've got a great book here. You've got a book that is filled with examples. Now, the span thing I've already shown you as far as configuring the specially formatted area. So you've seen that already. Here's an example. And it's a great example. What have they done here? They're using a class. Okay. So I should be able to go back and where I did that before for that big font. For if I wanted to just set that, you know, you got here class equals this, and you put that in a span. So that's what I would have had to have done. So I'm going to grab this example right here, just so you see it right there. And I'm going to go back to my once upon a time thing that we had here. All right. In fact, I'm going to save this file, save as, and we're going to save this as index4.html. Okay. And I'm going to remove this where it says ID equals big font. Okay. So I've removed that. And if I run that now, it's going to look a lot different because that first paragraph now is red. All right, but I want to change that O that we talked about before, just the O. So I'm going to come in here and literally copy in that example that they've shown here. So I want to do that, span class equal, and I want to hear this should say big font. All right, so I need this, and then I need my ending span tag right after the O and once. All right, now this can go away now. Let's see if I've been successful in just setting up that O to be bigger and none of the rest of it. You'll know because that'll change and none of the rest of it will change. Doesn't like it. Doggone. href styles. Big font. Oh, I still have all this stuff set. And the only thing I really want to have set right now is the font size. I don't want anything else. In fact, that font size of 120 pixels should be, oh, it's an ID. So, my error. This should say ID equals big font, not class equal. Showed you a very common mistake right there, but not on purpose. See how it's green and it's bigger? Okay. So, as I keep saying and saying and saying to you, you'll understand this. The more you go over it, the more examples you try. Go in, start creating very simple web pages and adding stuff to it. Stuff right out of the book if you want, if you don't know where to start. I've shown you the external style sheets. I mentioned that it must have a .css extension, have only the rules in it, no HTML tags. I showed you how to put comments in it. You can use the same style sheet on multiple pages. You already saw that. I used the styles.css for index3.html and index4.html. I showed you what the link tag was. Again, it's a self-contained tag, meaning there's no end tag. You put it in the header. It associates or links the external style sheet with your web page. We've been looking at everything that you put inside of there. Okay, so there shouldn't be anything new there. All right. Let's see. I do want to show you one last thing, and I don't know how well it'll work, but I'm going to try it anyway. I'm going to go back to here, and under my body, I'm going to put here, we've got all that background and all that other good stuff. Let's make the background, just so we know it's going to look a lot different, yellow. But I'm going to say margin, auto. Okay? Now, this is everything. Now I'm going to refresh. All right? What did it do? Not real much other than turn that yellow. But typically what margin auto will do, all right, is it will center stuff on the page. I've overwritten so much stuff that that's not going to really probably do very much right now. But what we'll see as we go on, we can try this margin left auto and margin right auto, but I don't think that's going to do much of anything for us. But I could be wrong. Let's do that, and let's grab the width too. In fact, we'll grab all this stuff, and they call this here container. All right. So, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come in here and call this container. So, pound container. And we've got margin left auto, margin right auto, and width of 80%. All right, we've got all that stuff in there. Whoops. And what I'm going to attempt to do now is grab that container, and I'm going to put it around these three paragraphs. So I'm going to put a div in here. This is why you use divs. And I'm going to say ID equal container. And when I get all done, I'm going to end my div. All right, let's see if that changed anything for these three paragraphs right here. Kind of hard to tell, but they moved over. All right, they're a little bit more centered. And you might say, well, no, they're really not. They are. It's hard to tell. But they're also now only taking up 80% of the page. All right. This has been quick. It may not have seemed quick as we were going through it, but this was a quick little introduction to using cascading style sheets or CSS. Last thing I'll mention is the way this works is it cascades down. So in other words, the inline styles, the ones with the span tags, take precedence over the stuff in the style tags, which takes precedence over the external files. So the stuff on the bottom takes precedence over stuff that's on the top. So it's a minor to major order. And it has to be like that, because if it was a major to minor order, you would never ever be able to use the other stuff. All right, last thing is, there, just like there is an HTML validator, there is a CSS validator. So I'm going to go in here, come on, and I'm going to open up the CSS validator right now. There it is. It looks almost the same, but it's CSS where the other one was HTML. I'm going to grab my whole file like we did before. Control A, Control, oops. Edit, select all, edit, copy, and I'm going to grab it and I'm going to paste it into here. And check. Sorry, we found errors. So there's something in there that it doesn't like. Parse error. URI. It says it's found one error, and it looks like it's on line 36. So let's go look on line 36 and see what we, oh, because I still left that there. So. All right, let's refresh, paste it in again, and run it again. Still found one error. Oh, I wonder, I know why. So let me go back one more time. It's because I still have that line at the bottom that's all empty. So let's remove all of it. Let's paste it in again. But now where it says with on the bottom, I'm getting rid of that. All right, so it's just got everything that I put in there. All right, and let's check that. Green means good. No errors found. So there was your introduction to CSS. All right, that's what the chapter was about. When I come back next, we will go over Chapter 4. And Chapter 4, which starts in your text on page 133, is entitled Visual Elements and Graphics. And I'll be back with that one shortly.